I'll edit them too. So if we say anything we don't want out in the world, you just let me know. Uh, I'm so glad you're all here. Thank you. Sable and Josh, Dr. Kissel, you know each other already, but Margot, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, my name's Margot. I'm a master's student at Colorado School of Mines, studying quantum engineering, and yeah, I don't know,
Cool.
not that much more to it.
No, that's pretty amazing. Um, I imagine you heard of this through colleagues at Mines?
Yes, I'm in a research ethics course right
Yeah.
now. So
Oh, right on. Oh, that's so great. I'm really glad. Um, it's been really fun for me to see various people come through this program and join us for conversation. So this afternoon, the topic that we had in mind was uh, One Health and vaccine hesitancy. And when I proposed the topic at the beginning of the semester, I was thinking specifically about the case of the bird flu, and avian influenza hasn't come to what I worried it might. So that seems good. So we can talk about bird flu or not, but the podcast I thought was really interesting, laid out some stuff we can talk through. Um, I think in this space of vaccine hesitancy in the One Health paradigm, there are all kinds of things to talk about around epistemic and ethical conditions, why people believe what they believe, what counts as belief versus knowledge. We can go down the epistemology rabbit hole. We can stay in the ethics landscape. We can talk about One Health as a paradigm. We can talk about different types of flu, including avian flu, whatever y'all want to talk about. Any interests?
Well, I was kind of interested in knowing your thoughts on how this relates to like environmental or agricultural ethics specifically.
Yeah, yeah.
I also had a slightly off topic but related thing that ties into agricultural ethics that I wanted to talk about.
Go for it. Yeah.
Well, in the podcast they were talking about how vaccines have like to help eradicate disease, and they specifically said that like vaccines and antibiotics. So I was thinking about something I had read before about like on dairy farms when they give these cows, like they just give them so many antibiotics in their food because they're not like out eating grass and stuff like cows are supposed to be doing. They're just eating corn that's full of antibiotics. And when I first read about that, I was really surprised to learn that that's what they're doing out there, and that also, you know how like every time we use antibiotics, that's like a chance for like a germ to like build up a resistance to it or something.
Yeah, yeah.
And when a germ builds up to resistance to an antibiotic, then we can't use that antibiotic anymore. So by like giving antibiotics to cows as a way to get around having to actually take care of them, we are maybe also putting ourselves closer to a time when we won't be able to use all those antibiotics.
Yeah, I think that sounds right on to me. Margot and Dr. Kissel, do you have thoughts, or do you want to go down the direction of antibiotics in agriculture for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a really compelling problem. And I think we've seen this in swine production, in cattle, and in chickens. The idea that in confinement agricultural practices, when you keep that many animals close together, just as if you keep a bunch of students in a classroom together for too long, germs are going to spread around, right? So the way to handle that is either by spreading out your agriculture, which takes a lot of land and resources,
Yeah.
or by treating your livestock. So yeah, I don't think you're wrong at all. We have for a long time now treated our livestock for their health and our health against disease. And when that fails, we have other strategies which are relevant to avian flu, how to deal with those. But yeah, that's led up to this real live concern about antibiotic resistance, which I'm sure we've all heard about, like super bugs in hospital settings. So these are real issues in human health as
Yeah.
well. But it's absolutely the case that antibiotic resistance is a real thing. And so now there's this like arms race between the evolution or the genetic change in bacteria and our capacity to treat them. Dr. Kissel, yeah, go for it.
I was just gonna jump in because I put the hand because the video, but
Yeah, no,
there was also
jump
talk
in.
like the zoological diseases question. I remember when COVID was first happening and we didn't know the origin, one of the thoughts might have been that it was like in these live animal market. And we still I guess don't know for certain. But then I get another layer of this like animal agriculture intersection with disease and the risks that are involved there, even independent of concerns we might have about animal welfare.
Yeah, and this is a space I'm really interested in, and that was why the focus was on, for me, was on One Health, because I think historically we've either treated, animals in veterinary practice or agriculture on the one hand, and humans in the medical setting in another hand, and then environmental concerns in a third hand, and we've treated those as separate disciplines, separate buckets of specialty, whatever. And the One Health approach has suggested that because of things like pandemics and zoonotic disease spread, that those three things are intimately related. So rather than three silos, as one interrelated discipline, if you will. And that was led actually by a group of veterinarians back in the 60s and 70s who, because of the zoonotic disease concerns, thought we had to treat these things together. So the American Veterinary Medical Association, the AVMA, came up with this idea of One Health as a paradigm. And that's where that's where a lot of talk in bioethics is right now too. Because it used to be bioethics, obviously, just between clinicians and their patients in the clinic. But little by little, there's been this recognition that public health has all these fingers and all these things, including agriculture and environmental health. So when we're thinking about bird flu, we can think about this either from a human health perspective, which we usually do, or we can think about it from an animal welfare perspective or a veterinary health perspective, or we can think about it environmentally. And in either case, there are different strategies. So I mentioned there, besides antibiotic spread, the other response to worries about bird flu is culling practices.
Yeah.
And so often, regularly, when there's an outbreak in a herd, no matter what that herd is, the practice is to cull the entire herd and just stop it where it starts. And that has all kinds of like animal welfare implications on top of economic implications and all these other things. So yeah, it's hard for me to tease apart these very carefully. So the podcast that we listened to was about vaccine hesitancy, but I think all of the stuff we're talking about is relevant. So we can go in any direction.
Hi. I was late. I'm sorry.
Dr. Kissel, I think you met Gretchen and Margot. Margot's coming from Colorado School of Mines today.
Hi.
To join
Nice to
us.
meet you. I had an advising appointment, so.
Oh,
I know Sable wanted to specifically talk about like more animal.
Well, yeah, I had
Related.
just mentioned the thing about the like cows and antibiotics and all of that.
Antibiotic resistance and
right. So for me, when this series this semester is vaguely generically on agriculture and environmental ethics, this is partly why. Because when I think about vaccine hesitancy in the podcast, this is obviously about, in particular, parents and their kids in the U.S. context, right? That's really the focus. But when I think about vaccine hesitancy, it has all these knock-on effects that really make it an environmental problem. Because if there's a runaway for any disease, does it become zoonotic? Does it translate to non-human populations? Or is the inverse the case? How is it handled? So there's an animal ethics problem. What sort of economic and agricultural knock-on effects does it have in terms of, functioning meat production? So there are all these fingers that tease out. So if we're hesitant about vaccines, is there a world, if some people are worried about vaccines for their kids, is there a way in which those people are going to then become worried about vaccines in their food animals, right? And it feels like they're not. And I want part of my focus this afternoon is I want to get us down to thinking about why not. What's the relevant difference? Right?
Are you connecting vaccines to antibiotic resistance when you say that? Or are you saying that food would be vaccinated? Because like antibiotic resistance is kind of different from vaccines, right? So
it is, yeah.
So
I am conflating the two.
Yeah.
But
I mean, that's okay because there is a shared thing there.
Yeah, there's a shared thing there, but you're right to call me out on that. I'm not being careful enough because when we're treating antibiotics are treating bacterial infection, right? And vaccines are treating viral infection, right? So
Yeah.
2 different things.
Well, also very different in outcome. Like you don't want to build antibiotic resistance on accident, but you want viral resistance. Yeah.
That's right. That's good. So yeah, I think now we're conflating a lot of things.
Yeah, and as far as the people hesitant about vaccines, worrying about antibiotics in their food, I honestly feel like the vast majority of those people aren't even aware about that there could be antibiotics in their foods through the meat that they're eating.
That's fair. That's fair. Josh, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's probably true in general, but I do think about like the power players, right? Like if you think about the current health administration, like JFK's like orientation is also seemingly anti, industrialized agriculture in a certain sort of way. And so I think there are some alliances there that like, I mean, we don't know what these politicians all think, but like, I'm not sure Trump cares personally, but JFK and that sort of like alliance of forces seem to have concerns about things. So I'm not surprised that some of them might be concerned about antibiotic use in animal agriculture and, the language around processed foods and so forth. And so I think there is this like interesting thing going on there. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a further point on that, but there is something difficult,
Yeah.
practically speaking, like how to change it, but also inflation of all these different forces.
Yeah. And I think I'm interested. I'm circling around. I don't have enough facts here, and I'm out of my depth in terms of maybe epistemological concerns. But I'm interested to know why there might be relationships between anti-vax communities and antibiotic communities, if there are in fact connections.
If there is, I would think it would just be like a general mistrust of medicine in general, perhaps.
Or like top-down governance and institutions. It's funny because it's like both sides tend to be anti-establishment in a different way. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, going up that last point, this is an anecdotal story, but so I've been vegan for like 16 years, and I do remember, especially when I first made that change, there was like this overlapping. Vegans were kind of weirdos, and so like the community they were part of had a lot of these people who were skeptical of things like vaccines and whatever. So I used to stay away more than I do now, but there is a sort of anti-establishment nature going on there, and like if these health authorities are telling us we can eat all these, high saturated fat foods and blah blah blah, then maybe they're also lying to us over here. And so I see how like step by step you can get to a place where like you have what I would regard as scientifically illiterate views about vaccines and even antibiotic use personally and stuff like that.
The RFK, not JFK, was very enlightening. I was like, I didn't know about this JFK thing.
Yeah. I mean,
Sorry,
they're related.
They are related, and it's only one letter.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
I see your point, and that's kind of what I was referencing. I remember this is before I didn't know like what RFK was going to be about, right? Like I didn't know what was about to happen, but all of a sudden a conservative family member of mine became very interested in like herbal medical practices. And like it's just was out of character. And a person who loves herbs, I love that. I'm not anti-vax by any means, but I have always been a health market girl and was frowned upon for it because it's expensive and it's unnecessary and organic agriculture doesn't actually do anything and fair trade means nothing and blah blah blah. All of a sudden, he's trying to persuade me the same thing I've been advocating for since I was a teenager. And I then discovered there was a person, his name was Robert F. Kennedy, and he's changing the conversation. So it's funny how two people will come to like a perverted version of the same conclusion for different reasons.
Yeah.
Like I love herbs too, but in a completely different way than you do, or like
in the same way, but for completely different reasons. And I think, I feel like my mind has been circling around trying to tease out those reasons and how they relate, because it feels like, I mean, there's probably a story to tell about malice that I can forego, but it doesn't seem like anybody is out for reasons of malice to be anti-vaccination or pro-vaccination or whatever. It feels to me like a fundamental belief issue. And a colleague and I in political science have been talking about this a lot lately, but it feels like there's a story to tell that if you start from an unassailable belief or a very difficult, intractable belief, that all of your facts are read through that belief system, and you can read the same set of facts and reach different outcomes. And so it's not about piling on more facts. And this is why I liked this podcast, because this is a physician who's obviously entrenched in vaccination policies and the science of vaccines. And he was saying, like, it's a misinformation problem. If they had the right information, right, then they would reach the right outcome. And I feel like that's almost like a brute epistemological story. Like, if you just gave somebody, like, give them a gift of a bucket of 50 facts, and are like, eat these 50 facts and you'll be cured of your misinformation or whatever. I think that's just not true.
It sounds like after our lecture today also.
Yeah, that was the same thing I
Yeah.
was thinking.
Yeah. We talked about phenomenology in class. So.
There's this philosopher, I forget his first name, Nguyen, but it's on epistemic echo chambers and epistemic bubbles. And so the bubble is like, you don't have the right information. And so that's actually easy to solve. You just give someone the information and now the bubble pops. But the real problem, it seems like we face, is this problem of echo chambers, so right? You're like ideologically interpreting the same set of facts in a very different way. And such that actually, like, there's some empirical evidence. I don't know how reliable this is, so I don't want to jump on it, but like, getting new facts that contradict your worldview actually just make you stronger in the view you already hold once you've already abided this ideological orientation here. And so that's like, I mean, his solution in this essay that he writes is like not very compelling in the sense that it seems hard, but like you have to like build trust and like you have to have people you trust introducing new facts to you. But yeah, so anyways, there is some evidence that you're right that the new facts aren't going to help, given that what's happening is we're looking through these ingrained perspectives or ideological orientations.
Yeah, that makes really. I'll be interested to track down that article, and if we can, Josh, I'll share it with everybody. But that idea of the epistemic echo chamber or the bubble is really interesting to me too, because it's posed as if it's an epistemic problem, when I think it's in fact probably an ethical problem, right? It's probably a value problem, that it's a bubble that around which or through which or within which the same set of facts is read differently. Oh, right on. Thanks. Josh just put it in the chat there, and I'll share that with in the YouTube channel. So the physician in this podcast said the same thing, right? We just have to like build trust in the scientific process. This is what his students are trained to do, and when we do that, then little by little we can overcome this. But then he gave the case of why during the COVID pandemic the public lost trust in science, and those reasons didn't seem particularly compelling. It seemed like an epistemic problem, like the public didn't understand how science works, and so as a result of not understanding how science works, they interpreted, changing direction in COVID-19 policy as, I don't know, misinformation from the medical establishment or failures of medical.
That was already a God. It was already happening.
Oh.
It was already like, I mean, I feel like untruth or like like conspiratorial perspectives on governance was already a thing by the time COVID started. So COVID was this like pinnacle, like, you see, there's a conspiracy. So it was like a perfect storm of doubt.
Like,
Yeah, I think it's. Oh,
sorry,
sorry.
go ahead.
No, go ahead, Margo. Yeah.
Like they kind of said, like before COVID and after COVID, like you see this really big change, just kind of like to your point, like that really seems to be, at least in my memory and like understanding of kind of scientific understanding, and like how the public sees science. It seems like there was a distinct change in tone, kind of like before versus after, that I think is like well, I don't know, well explained by COVID being such a prominent example of kind of this changing of scientific process and like rapid development of like the mRNA vaccine, that people didn't quite understand that like that is how science works.
But I said the fear was not just science, right? Because there is scientific doubt plenty with, lots of different things as environmentalists, we all know it. But there's also medical practice, there's a lot of doubt, and pharmaceuticals. So like both sides have heavy doubts around, and that rightfully so, around the pharmaceutical industry. So that I think the illusion was not that science is incorrect. The illusion was that the vaccines were not science. They think they have the scientific truth, or whatever the truth is, which is like in history we used elderberry to cure our coughs. Now the pharmaceuticals want to sell me something. They don't view that as science, I think, and that's the problem.
Well, I think part of the COVID-19 case, I think, is so compelling because part of it is also a failure of science communication. Because the podcast host had mentioned, rightly so, that it was absolutely incredible that within 4 months of the COVID outbreak in the US, we had a vaccine, right? The idea, and that was because we've been working on mRNA technologies for years before that. But I didn't know that we were that far along. And so when in just a few months, we were like, we've got this new technology and a result from it, and we can start getting it to people, like that speed, I think didn't help, right? Because there was no lead up. There was no like, we're working on this thing. It's going to be like landing a thing on the moon, right? We're going to put all this money in very public, very visible effort.
Bill Gates and like all these.
And all of a sudden it was like, we've got this thing.
Yeah.
Now, if the public had known or had been involved and excited about the process, like this had been an emerging technology and we were all behind it like AI or something, then maybe it would have had a different uptake.
Yeah.
Maybe. I'm just.
I don't even know how you would get the public involved in something like that, though.
That's why they were.
Because
who's going to care? Like, what's mRNA? We're gonna have to talk about DNA and RNA and like.
I don't even think the public is necessarily up to date on AI advancements. They just like the AI that they have.
Right.
So they're like, I like AI. Like I don't think that. I don't know what a solution would be to that. 8 billion people in the world, like.
Yeah.
I think in some cases, like, the lack of information itself is not the problem. It's kind of what people prioritize. Like with people who were anti-mask, it wasn't because, at least in my experience from what I've seen in person and online, it wasn't that people were like, oh, we shouldn't wear masks because masks don't work. It's like, oh, we shouldn't wear masks because they're trying to censor us or some other conspiracy theory or something else. It wasn't like, oh, well, scientifically masks don't work. It was something unrelated, like some conspiracy, deeper meaning, surveillance, something else like that.
But even if it's not a conspiracy thing, there's something I think inherent in what you said, Sable, about like anti-authoritarianism, right?
Yeah, that
We're
too.
telling
They
you
didn't
to
want to
this
be
thing.
told to wear a mask. So I did hear that from some people at work when they complained that they had to wear a mask. They're like, oh, they're just trying to take more of our freedoms away.
And then-
instead of prioritizing the actual issue, they focused on one small aspect and being unwilling to sacrifice this small degree of freedom for the greater good, basically.
And then you'll voluntarily relinquish your freedoms for some other really interesting departments.
Yeah.
Oh,
But this is why the question of what we owe each other is so interesting. Because there's a contractual story to tell, like because we're members of the same society or the same classroom or the same ethics group, we've got obligations to one another vis-a-vis these things. But teasing out under what conditions and why and I don't know. I think that problem of what we owe each other is really interesting, especially in the case of vaccine hesitancy.
so when you say what we owe each other, I was already thinking about the term collective consensus. And I was wondering, like, has it ever happened? If it has, could it happen again? And then you bring up this, which makes me think, is that the way? Which is restoring a sense of obligation to each other. So I don't know if you want to yap about that for a bit.
We can yap about whatever for sure. Collective, what'd you call it?
Consensus.
Collective consensus.
About anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can come up with 2 pseudo examples, and Margot and Josh, you can jump in here too. But one of those, I think, for me was the space race. Like, I think because we had this sense of us versus them with Russia at the time, there was this consensus that we were going to put money and time and effort into this thing. The public was involved and supportive, and the government was involved and supportive, and there was this collective push to the moon, let's say. The only other example I can think of around our themes especially is the ozone debate in the 80s. The 80s and 90s, was that 80s and 90s? I kind of lost track of it. Too old. But we had this problem, right? There was a hole in the ozone layer, and we solved it, right? And like that's one of those rare cases where we took something that was happening environmentally, and there wasn't a lot of hemming and hawing. There wasn't like two sides to the debate. We were just like, there's a hole in the ozone. It's caused by these things. What can we do? We can ban chlorofluorocarbons. We did solve the hole in the ozone layer. Like, I don't know if that's a collective decision in the same way.
Well, it collectivized, I guess, but the first one's interesting because it was competition.
Right.
So I don't know if I would call that consensus.
Oh.
Yeah. it
And I'm
wasn't,
not
like,
I'm
done
not
for,
trying to be
like, the
specific
greater good.
on the term here, but I'm trying to figure out, like, I guess I'm always just trying to find a reconciliation pattern here. So like when I say that both sides, I hate even thinking about things in a binary like that, but when they are both anti-establishment, but in like opposing ways, I try to recognize the unity in that and then try to allow them to see each other's fears, right? I'm really scared the pharmaceutical company is going to take over the world. Well, I'm really scared that the government is going to take over the world. So let's maybe talk about that core.
Mhm.
And that could be the way towards consensus where we're not fighting over stupid things and we can actually get something done. That's kind of my dream vision.
Yeah.
I do that with my conservative family members a lot, where I try to hear what they're protecting in their hearts as sacred, even though it's coming out as not cool at all. And I say, okay, he's guarding something sacred.
Well, we've got something like this in the case of vaccines, I think. I think. So hear me out and then tell me if I'm wrong. But I think this is the heart of the free rider problem in vaccine policy. So the podcast gave the example of, was the polio vaccine where New York City people were lined up
Yeah.
6 city blocks that.
I didn't get to hear the podcast.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
it was the polio vaccine they were talking about.
So when the polio vaccine was launched, the public knew that polio was this horrible disease, right? And we're given evidence that the polio vaccine was out and people lined up for it. Now, not everybody lined up for it. And so there had to be some, from a policy perspective, some hearing other perspectives. And I think that's what you're talking about with collective consensus. So there's a small percentage of the population who didn't line up around the block and were like, I'm not taking the STAM vaccine. Those people were protected anyway, because everybody around them was protected. That's the idea of herd immunity, right? So even if literally everybody was vaccinated, there's still the 3% of the public who would still be at risk. But they'd be protected because everybody else around them is. And those are free riders. And that works, that sort of consensus works only if a sufficient number of people are vaccinated such that everybody has herd immunity. So I feel like there's maybe an example of collective, maybe.
I mean, I wish I had engaged with the podcast before I came to this one, but because I would have more to say.
Yeah.
But I see your vision, and what it made me think of is maybe, which is very common in most like ethics at this point, you have a lofty ideal, and it's not about achieving the ideal ever, but it's the action and the striving that perpetuates, so like we're never gonna get back to the Garden of Eden, but we will try at least to cope now. And doing that is through trying to make things feel like a beautiful garden again. Not to be biblical, that's not typically my route, but it seems to relate to both sides here.
So your take then, Gretchen, on what we owe each other is at least seeing each other's perspectives and striving towards consensus.
Yeah, not just seeing each other's perspectives though, seeing the mutuality. Try and then respect. This really changed my perspective when I deal with people who have opinions that I really don't like. That they're protecting something sacred to them, and oftentimes they don't even know what it is. So like xenophobia is a great example. There's a fear when somebody's exhibiting xenophobia that they're self-guarding. If I can get in touch with that in one way that they're sympathetic with, I can open up a world of opportunity for them to not be so hateful. But I have to honor that fear. I cannot be mean about it or throw facts and whatever.
Yeah.
Which is hard. That's a difficult task. It's a high demand to ask of somebody. I want to be hateful and I want to tell you you're a bad person, but I can't because they won't do anything. And if my lofty goal is consensus, you'll never get it by making somebody put up defenses.
This makes sense. Dr. Kissel, does this sound a little bit like Tim Scanlon to you?
Who?
It's hard to be a political philosopher. It feels really hard. I'm very pessimistic in the situation because it feels like there's a lot of, at least for powerful people, there's a lot of value in this being a politicized debate, right? There's a lot of value in being able to figure things out. Perspective here. It doesn't immediately threaten like capital stuff very much. When people are concerned about vaccine hesitancy and stuff, so it's a really great way to get people who might otherwise not want to support a particular agenda to get on your side, right? So I feel like there's like so much political value, at least in the short term, politicians to like encourage, not finding the shared value, but rather seeing each other as enemies. Then it's really hard for me to imagine the like from here to there situation, and then period. I think it's really complicated by the fact that then there's also these like short-term, long-term concerns we have when we're thinking about public health and stuff, right? Like so vaccine mandates and like requiring students to get them to go to school. That's a way to get the numbers up now, which is really important to like have the herd immunity. But it's also a way of breeding distrust and breeding the sort of reaction, right? When you're forcing me to do actually. And so it feels like, the short-term, long-term problems seem really strict, and then just the value, which we can all see in having, I don't know what you call it, misinformation.
So are you saying that you feel that like because debate and disagreement is essential to our democracy, that the idea of collective consensus is in opposition to that culture? Like it might counteract being.
I don't know if this is totally functional thing, but like having a position that you can like differentiate yourself from the other side is like a thing that is useful for winning elections. And this is a position that's particularly suitable for a party that's not looking out for the interests of some common good or people in general, right? Like it's easy to get frustrated about this. It's hard to understand like all the things you have to do to like make someone literate about vaccine use or something. It's hard to understand that. And it's really easy to understand like I don't feel comfortable with this thing I don't understand. And to be honest, I don't think it really. I think long term is bad for capitalism and everything because people get sick, people are less productive, blah blah blah. But in the short term, it just feels like it serves the interest of, I think, bad faith actors. I think it would be good. So I'm not disagreeing with like the goal. I think we still have to try because we actually just there's not another solution I'm aware of. We do need to be able to trust other people, and we need to try and form alliances with people who have very different views than us. So I think like something about this anti-establishment order is something to work on. I think talking about, okay, why are we skeptical of pharmaceutical companies? There's a way I can bring them to people on the left and the right that allows us to find some unity. Yes, but it just feels like it's really hard for the like good faith actors succeed at that when there's people trying to intentionally make things messy and dirty. That's gonna help them from the election.
I see your point, and I feel that like you're right for bringing that up. And I imagine that maybe what I can reframe this as is an attempt to allow debate to occur with a different goal than to just be in opposition all the time. Because I feel like as soon as you start a debate, you lost because they don't ever really want to understand you. If you can at least try to allow understanding to be a fundamental goal, then debate will still occur. It's actually the whole idea of consensus is demanding you disagree, because if you all agree, then there's no point in even pursuing this in the first place. So I imagine it would still perpetuate disagreement, but it would also perpetuate understanding, equality.
I will say, I think like the sort of story you're telling is the sort of one that Nguyen, that guy cited, is suggesting you need to build trust. And how do you build trust? And one, people are close to you. But two, you're not seeing that person as your enemy. So like you have to intentionally not see somebody as your enemy if you think that's gonna.
So themes, right? One of those is the idea of acting in good faith. So if you start from a position of bad faith, Sartrean or otherwise, you can't get off the ground policy making. That sounds like someplace we've reached. So that already puts us on bad footing right now in the political. And then there's the idea of consensus. So Tim Scanlon, who we were talking about, wrote this book. I don't know. Again, I'm going to say in the 90s. I don't know. Wrote this book on what we owe each other. That was the title of the book. And he's a contractualist, and he thinks like John Rawls and other political theorists, that the way to understand our sense of responsibility is to find a strategy to put yourself in somebody other's shoes and make a decision that you both can agree on. They each had different strategies for this, but basically the contractualist project is that as a community, we come together and put blinders on our differences in some way and reach a consensus that can be agreeable based on our differences. So it's kind of like a mean between extremes. But again, in order to get that contractualist project off the ground, you have to act in good faith. Because if you're manipulative about it, there's no contract, right? Or there's a false contract. So I think, Gretchen, a lot of what you're saying, I read these like contractualist themes, but I think Josh is right on that. Like in this moment of bad faith action, it's really hard to tease that out. So when I'm thinking about RFK, not JFK, when I'm thinking about RFK's policies or statements on vaccines, are those coming from, like, how do we understand them? Are they coming from, I don't know, real shared fears that are being expressed in these sort of under evidenced ways or mis-evidenced ways? Or is it really just bad faith?
Do you think he thinks he's wrong? Like, or like morally wrong?
I don't know. He's been so consistent for such a long time on some things, and then radically inconsistent on other things that it makes me hesitate. So there's a audio clip that came out from a podcast he'd done before this current administration, where he was basically equating Donald Trump with the Nazi party, right? So he was very much anti-Trump. And now here he is fully pro-Trump. And so there's an instance of bad faith. It feels to me, I mean, maybe his view changed, but that's a pretty short window. So is that, which of those two things is he doing when it comes to vaccine policy? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But because that's an open question for me, it throws in this problem of good faith, right? How do you know when somebody's acting from a position that should be engaged? Right? If he really is concerned, as many of my neighbors are, some of my family, about the safety of vaccines, right? And that's maybe why they're going to alternative medicine strategies or whatever. Like, there's a conversation you can have. Like, I see your fear, right? I understand that part of it's like, it's really hard to understand statistics. Like, it is the case that what 1%, 2% of people taking a vaccine might have an adverse reaction. Like, I get it. That's an actual threat.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do we understand that? How do we think through that together? Like, that's a thing we can engage. But if it's not that, if it's bad faith, then I don't know. I don't know how to deal with that.
I mean, it sounds like even from the get, we have to figure out if it's bad faith, right? Because we have to figure out what benefit is it to him to not get funding from the pharmaceutical industries that want him to perpetuate vaccines? For him, I don't know if like you could use the phrase anti-establishment for a man like him, but like he's trying to give that illusion.
Yeah.
And so what would be the benefit?
I always try to
He's
figure out
a
the
truly
same
confounding
thing,
individual.
what even the benefit is. Another inconsistency as far as RFK and vaccines and all this goes. Trump himself got the COVID vaccine like a week or two ago, and there are people online who are like praising that and stuff. Like people who support Trump, like the inconsistency with they're against vaccines, but then Trump himself had gotten the COVID vaccine, even though his own administration is saying, "Oh, we don't need to recommend that anymore."
Yeah.
So it makes me wonder more what their motive is. If Trump himself knows, or someone told him, close to him, advised him that he should still be getting it, why do they not want other people to be getting it?
Yeah. So yes, that the current administration is a confounding case writ large. But to circle us back around, right? The idea of vaccine hesitancy seems like I think my take home is that it's not just an epistemic problem. Like, we can't just better inform the public and there'll be better uptake. I think there's something more fundamental going on. And trying to tease out what that looks like and why is part of this, like, building up of good faith and trust in science again, and all these things the podcast host was talking about. But yeah, it's telling that this podcast was infectious diseases, vaccine hesitancy, and what we owe each other. Because there's a sense that what we owe each other is to get vaccinated, to build up herd immunity, to protect everybody. But I think that's at odds with my individualist sense, maybe for some people that they're anti-establishment, anti-authority, anti-whatever. And so reconciling public health against individual choice is so fundamental to medicine and bioethics that I think that's for me the low bar, like core value tension in this problem.
I mean, I don't know how else. It feels to me like I'm not totally convinced, but there's a sort of argument that like, at least interpersonally, we kind of have to just assume good faith. I know like when I do my classroom, I tell students, you have to assume everybody's trying to get the truth and blah, blah, blah. And it feels like in some way, if we want to build real consensus, build trust, kind of, whether or not we have evidence to the contrary, at least we have to assume that the person we're engaging with is interested in like finding out the truth, just like you are. And so if I could believe that fully, then it would make the strategy kind of easy. It's like you kind of assume people are engaging in good faith and just keep going with that. And I think it does seem to make it more likely that people can trust. I think the big caveat is just like, I think politically or socially, this seems to be a big problem. If you engage with good faith with somebody, it's like a game theory thing. You engage with good faith with somebody who's engaged in bad faith, you're going to undermine yourself. And I also think because of how elections have been worked, there's a lot of value in having an enemy, especially if, as I think is the case, there are some bad positions of views out there. So it feels like the strategy I think is most warranted politically. It's a different one than the one and the one that like I don't really know what the result is.
I missed the last part of what you said.
Yeah, you're cutting out a little bit.
All right, I was saying that I think the interpersonal strategy is engage in good faith, but then I feel like the most warranted or justified political strategy is to recognize some people are engaged in bad faith and
Yeah, that it makes sense to me that there's like political capital in defining enemies, right? The other, and that's antithetical to interpersonal relationships, which I think, Josh, is what you're getting at, right? Like between individuals, we want to act in good faith, but it's not politically advantageous to do that if your job is to, especially in a two-party system, to see yourself and the other.
Yeah.
I hope we all can see ourselves with that. I do think if you're accurate about there being bad faith actors or real enemies, you can do that in a way that's not bad faith. And I don't think it's healthy to pretend it's not these other forces at play, right? So that's why, like, yeah, I'm not going to prevent, I think, the pharmaceutical interests have, industry has my interest that part, but there are for-profit healthcare initiatives. But like, it's much more difficult of a line to walk, I think, than what the other side is using, if I'm assuming they're engaged in that thing. I don't think the other side is all Republicans or all right, but I think some subset of people.
That was more enlightening or elucidating for me about like the previous conversation we had, thinking about it in terms of policymakers and how like, oh, but sorry. Yeah, I had a question for you.
Okay.
Regarding policymakers, and it's people experience a lot of doubt around their policymakers, right? And I hear kind of like an up in arms, like they're all crooks, right? So if I criticize something, then well, they're all crooks, and that is like the centrist approach. And it's a really irritating response to receive because it feels very unproductive. But it also is in direct response to what you're saying, which is, I mean, yeah, bad faith is in their culture and it's essential for them to get things done if they're doing things like in opposition. They don't want to be in good faith. So, I mean, I don't know, like if you have anything interesting to say about that, that would help me piece things together.
I think briefly, like we can't assume any individual is in bad faith, and we're trying to think about what the incentive structures are that exist. It's not like anybody who works in pharmacy, in pharmacy, biological science or something, is bad faith. In fact, I think that aren't. It's just that this industry hasn't invented that blah blah blah. So I think as best as we can, I don't know how true this is. Not create like individual enemies or even like this whole debate about whether Trump's an evil person or not just feels like irrelevant because the question is what incentive is used behind what social structure has an interest in behaving this way. And that's a problem that like if Jonathan Bieber was there or I was there, I'd have a similar tendency. So yeah, that's not
I'm
helping.
so hard to understand you here. Because you are cutting out a little bit. But what I think you're saying is to redirect the attention from the individual level of a single politician or a group of politicians when people say they're all crooks, and direct it instead at a systemic perspective and say like, it's not, we don't need to figure out whether one individual is evil or not, or if all individuals are evil or not. We need to figure out the effects. No, it's not effects. It's different.
Consequences.
Let me go back to the idea. So renounce the idea of focusing on the individual. I don't need to figure out if somebody's evil or not. What I do need to figure out is what?
If
I
the
guess that's what
system
I'm asking.
rewards evil.
Yeah,
Like incentives, I think.
Yeah, Margot's got
I
it.
think, yeah, because I think that kind of goes back to like you were saying earlier, like there are certain aspects of individuals in the current administration or the administration as a whole. There are things that are really confounding, and I think that goes back to like it's sometimes the incentives are really unclear. I don't know. I'm just thinking RFK is such a really interesting guy. And like trying to think of the incentives there just really don't make sense. So I think, yeah, I think like
Okay.
framing it in terms of incentives, like I think that makes a lot of sense to me. Because that's what makes it so confusing is like not being able to track where all this like motivation for different actions is coming from.
Yeah. Those incentive structures, some of which are opaque to us, right? So in the case of a politician getting feedback from social media and those close proximately to them, versus what we see at a distance, I think it's really hard to evaluate individuals. So it probably makes sense to me that you'd have to assess things systemically first, understand incentive structures, and then look to see what drives individual behavior. And that disrupts the idea that there can be an individual agent who is acting from just merely good faith or bad faith, but instead an individual agent is being incentivized in a particular direction. And nudging those incentives is what changes behavior and our perceptions of attitudes. Now, I don't want that. I personally don't want that to be all there is, because I do want to be able to tell a story about somebody's, moral attitudes or moral incentives or something. Oh, okay, Josh, I'll read this out. So Josh, you said in the chat, I think it's probably unhelpful to focus on individual bad guys instead of identify what incentives exist that lead someone to act in a way that might be harmful.
Like Margot.
Yeah, like Margot said, thinking in terms of incentives or institutions or social forces will lead to less blowback and negative reactions from individuals. Yeah, I don't think it'll always be easy to identify exactly which incentive structures exist. Excuse me. And I think there'll be a lot of incentives, and they don't all go the same way.
I love that I could hear your thoughts clearly. That was nice. That was nice.
Yeah. So I titled this session, the case of bird flu. So I guess what I was thinking was, I could imagine a world in which avian flu had taken off and jumped to human populations, and then all of a sudden there was an infectious zoonotic disease. We have questions already about how we handle avian flu in avian populations. But when it jumps, let's say there's another push like there was for COVID for a vaccine policy, what is that going to look like and how is that being uptaken? And it's not just that people don't have enough information, probably. It's that they're incentivized politically and economically to get these things or not get these things. The podcast suggested that not allowing kids back to school before they were vaccinated was one way of, nudging towards herd immunity. But to Josh's point, that also nudges a small population in the other direction. And so incentives, any particular incentive has all these knock-on effects.
Yeah, like the worst thing is like the kids whose parents are raising them to deny truth now don't get to go to public school where they're supposed to learn. Yeah, that would be
effects.
Yeah. I am interested in that article. I feel like that'll be.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'll share that ION article. This is such a big topic. I feel like we've danced all around some core themes, but I think the way that epistemic issues, so questions about knowledge and what we know and how we know, are linked to systemic problems of incentives, which are linked then to fundamental value claims about how we're positioned vis-a-vis those knowledge claims, all have this a role to play in this problem of vaccine hesitancy. And I feel like I like the podcast again because it's this one very particular perspective of a physician saying, just basically, our physicians have to go out and teach people better and build trust. And when they do that, people will get vaccinated. And I just think I love the optimistic naivete. And I just don't think it's going to happen. And the other thing about the last thing, one other thing I'll say about the podcast is there was this moment in it where the podcast host asked the physician, has questions of vaccine hesitancy changed admissions to your College of Medicine? And the guy said, yeah. And he danced around this, which you guys might remember, but he said, yes, it has. When some of our applicants say they're anti-vax, there might be religious reasons for that, and we're respectful, I think is exactly what he said. But then he goes on to say, but if they're not willing, if a person expresses their feelings so strongly that they're not willing to vaccinate patients, they're not a good fit for our program. So there's already I don't know, Josh, if we'd call it like an incentive or a nudge or something, but there's already here's the sort of person that can be a physician at this medical school, and here's the sort of person who will not. And so from a position of authority, this College of Medicine is just basically saying, like, we don't admit anti-vaxxers because they can't do medicine. If you don't believe in science, this was a quote, if you don't believe in science, you can't be a physician. So there's already this really interesting space. And you remember during the COVID pandemic, a subset of nurses were refusing to vaccinate patients at hospitals because they also had shared these, they were of the percentage of the population who shared these anti-vax tendencies. So there are all these really interesting effects at the systemic level about what constitutes a professional and how there are epistemic constraints to what it means to be a physician. And if you don't believe those constraints, then you're off on being an alternative medicine physician sometimes, but not a professional in that sense.
Yeah. Gosh, now we're pushing towards the conversation about privatized healthcare. We can't do that in
Privatized,
5 minutes.
Well, and Margot, I know you're not here, but you likely know and have read that in Florida here we have this school choice initiative, where at the education level, for exactly the same reasons, we've basically stopped funding public schools and we're putting all that money into funding alternative education. It's for the exact same reasons. Right?
Yeah. I'm originally from Iowa, and it's like the same.
Yeah. So
right when I was like graduating high school, it was like school choice was just starting to come onto the table.
Yeah.
And it's been an interesting scenario to now watch from a distance, and now that I'm not in public schools anymore, to see how the public schools have changed since like in the past 5 years, because it's been a notable change with like school choice coming into play.
Yeah. And it seems like I'm stuck now, Josh, on your idea of incentive structures, but it seems like there's a political move to reshape incentive structures, which then reshape everything else, right? To align with value positions, to account for value positions. It's a little bit like consensus building.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was like, God, because I agree that the public school system needed help, but like, I don't agree with the way you think that I don't agree that this is the way. But yeah, there are really big problems with the way our public education operates. And like, I would say a big problem is its lack of support for certain marginalized groups. So the response of funding private schools is like the antithesis of handling that issue. Or, oh gosh, yeah.
But it feels like it's I don't even know how to describe this in terms of your like consensus building.
I can describe it.
But,
it's something that we shouldn't be pinned against each other to discuss, because now I can't talk about public education reform without it being about private school funding. Right. I have to only talk in that binary. That's not cool. We could agree on something really creative and interesting in a magical world where we weren't supposed to fight against each other, red and blue.
Yeah. I feel like all I've done in this session so far is bring up all these conflating questions to demonstrate how particularly messy
Yeah.
even vaccine hesitancy is. But then we get off on education, political structures, and consensus building. Nothing about this is easy. And then on top of that, you've got this proposal to build a One Health structure, which would bring together public health people, medical people, environmental health people, and get them all talking to resolve potentially transgressive zoonotic disease. So there's that.
Like in buildings happen, but I do think one of the questions I always think about is structurally how some positions are easier than others, right? Like if one is like my individual right to choose, because you understand versus all these things really defined clear, maybe you ask you're choosing, you're positive, there's like
We
We
lost
can't
you.
quite understand.
I got
Sorry.
type, please. I do want to hear what you have to say.
It's weird because when you're talking, it's like we can hear
For a second.
background voices
Yeah.
too, and then you cut out and the background voices come.
And it starts okay, and I'm like, I hear structure.
We got
I
it.
heard the word structure. And then it just. What? Did you blow it off?
We didn't have Dr. Kissel introduce himself, but he's been a postdoc with our research group, and is an excellent philosopher of political and social philosophy.
At UCF?
He's a postdoc here, at UCF, looking for his next steps coming up. So, Margot, thank you again for joining us. We're going to wait for Josh's comment, but I know we're coming up to time in case you've got to. So I'm so glad to meet you.
It's nice to meet
Yeah,
you.
thanks for
And nice
thanks
to
for
meet
hosting
you.
this.
So Josh, I always think about structural issues and debates, like some sides easier than others. Yeah, for example, individual freedom versus hard to assess consequences. But the upside, the One Health thing is a compelling position that I think can take a lead in the debate. And I think if it can take a lead in the debate, it's hopeful. Yeah, I'm totally on board. I think, One Health emerged from the complexity and the failures of each of these individual silos. And the proposal is like, if you think about it holistically, you can get a sense that we'll respond better to complex cases like zoonotic disease. I'm completely on board. I think it's going to take governance and incentive structures and all these things that aren't there yet. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Framing of a debate can really matter a lot more than the details. Yeah, 100%.
Is
The
true.
details are too complex, and if we start there, yeah. Okay. So I think, in some sense, what Dr. Kissel is saying is what this physician in the podcast was saying too, that it's going to take different strategies, different educational approaches, the way we train medical professionals. It's a longer path to combat vaccine hesitancy. The downside is in the short term, like a lot more people are going to die than need to. And so there's a tension there between fast actions that have these blowbacks and longer term actions that might be subtler and more sustainable. Yeah, yeah, Josh, exactly. Hence my worry about the bird flu. Yeah, fingers crossed, no more pandemics before this works out. Yeah.
That would suck.
Yeah. So again, it wasn't that long ago. I mean, it was the end of the summer when we were putting together this series, where I was thinking quite a bit about bird flu and where that was going to go, and I think we kind of just lucked out so far.
I know, and I had a bird feeder. And then I left for Ireland, and I was like, my bird feeder, it's gonna be a hot spot.
Yep.
Uh,
Friends, thank you so much. The last session for this semester's series is on November 5th. So in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about this one's titled Energy Conservation in the Environments, the Case of Artificial Intelligence.
the last one.
For this semester, yeah. And I will welcome everybody's input into what we do next term. The way it works is one of us or some subset of us comes up with a theme. It can be loose, it can be specific, and we build a series around that theme. So if any of you have stuff you want to talk about, like
I want to talk about invasive species.
yeah, we could do an invasive species thing, sure. You send me some ideas, and I'll work that out. But we'll run the same thing every semester. Well, spring and fall in particular. And it's just a chance to hang out. So Margot, thank you again for being here. Invite your friends, family, pets, whatever. Love to see everybody next time.
Bye. Thank you for
Bye.
coming.
Thanks, everybody. See ya. I guess I'll stick around when we get there.